HOA towed a black SUV at 3 a.m., labeled it a violation, called it suspicious. The truck was part of an active surveillance operation. The federal agent wasn't just watching the block, he was watching the HOA. Now, quiet cul-de-sacs are under investigation, and the president is in handcuffs. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. I moved to Silvercrest Estates the year after my wife passed. It was quiet, clean, and efficient, qualities I could understand. The HOA had rules, sure, but I was used to rules. 28 years in the Air Force makes you see structure not as oppression, but as alignment. At least that's what I told myself. My house sat on the end of a cul-de-sac, far enough from the gates to feel private, but close enough to hear the whir of the guardhouse fan if the wind shifted. Flag out front, hedges trimmed, garage swept. Nothing to complain about. I gave them no reason. That changed the day my son came home. Ethan didn't say much when he called, just asked if I still had room. Of course I did. He arrived 3 days later with a duffel bag, a laptop case, and a blacked-out SUV that looked like it came from some government catalog no one's supposed to see. He parked it on the driveway, parallel to the house. It hadn't moved since. He hadn't said much since either. We hadn't been close, not since his deployment days. He followed me into service, though a different branch. Intelligence. He always had a sharper mind than mine, quieter too. We lost touch somewhere between my tours and his clearances. Years passed, calls got shorter. Now he was here, in the guest room, blinds always drawn, coffee always brewing. And the SUV, it just sat there, dark and untouched, like it was watching. The first HOA notice came on day 6. Unapproved vehicle. Potential violation of HOA vehicle policy. The envelope was sealed with the same pretentious crest they used on the newsletter. A golden house with a tree and eagle, like some fake colonial seal. I set it on the kitchen counter, unsure whether to laugh or shred it. I didn't say anything to Ethan that night, just watched him eat toast in silence while the glow of a monitor blinked against his face. I hadn't seen what was on the screen. He never left it open long enough. The next morning, Karen Whitmore appeared at my door. If Silvercrest had a queen, she wore cardigans and pearls, and ruled with the clipped smile of a dental receptionist who'd just denied your insurance. "Hi, David," she said sweetly. "Hope you're doing well. Just wanted to mention, we've had some concerns about the vehicle in your driveway." I gave her a practiced smile. "It's my son's. He's living with me now." She tilted her head. "Of course, but we do have bylaws about vehicles that appear stationary, and certain types of models that might draw the wrong kind of attention." I didn't respond, just nodded. She left with the satisfaction of someone who thought she'd issued a warning, when really she'd just issued an alert. To the wrong man. That week, I watched the neighbors watching us. Side glances, whispered porch talks, kids told not to play too close. Ethan never addressed it. He went for walks at odd hours, took his coffee black, kept the SUV locked and untouched. But I could feel it. Something was ticking behind his silence. He hadn't told me what he did now, and I hadn't asked. Maybe I didn't want to know. Or maybe I was afraid I already did. What I did know was this. The SUV wasn't the threat. The real problem was the people trying to move it, and they had no idea what they were about to set in motion. Word count, approximately 705. It started with a yellow slip taped to my front door. Not mailed, not tucked in the box, taped, right at eye level, like a warning poster. It read, "Second notice, non-operational vehicle in violation of HOA guidelines. Immediate action required to maintain community aesthetic and safety standards. I found it at 5:45 a.m. during my usual coffee and porch routine. The dew hadn't even lifted from the grass yet, but Karen was already patrolling. I could see her 2 houses down, pretending to inspect her hedges with a clipboard. She didn't look up when I pulled the slip down. She didn't need to. We both knew she put it there herself. That same day, I got a $50 fine emailed to me. The subject line, Urgent, violation of Article 4, Section 2.3, stationary vehicles. I read the bylaws front to back, twice. Nothing in there outright prohibited Ethan's SUV, but Karen wasn't the type to let facts get in the way of her crusade. She was fighting for optics, not order. I tried to talk to her the next day, caught her outside, watering plastic flowers in a ceramic pot. "Karen," I said, keeping my tone even, "the SUV's registered, insured. Nothing in the rules says it can't be parked in my driveway." She didn't stop watering. "David, the board has received complaints. It's about how it looks, and the neighborhood feels uncomfortable. Because it's black? Because it hasn't moved. People are starting to ask questions." I almost said, "Good, maybe they should," but I didn't. Instead, I nodded and walked away. Let her believe she'd won that round. That week, the tone shifted. More letters, more fines. The dollar amounts grew, $75 then $100. One cited refusal to comply with neighborhood harmony. Whatever that meant. Worse than the fines were the neighbors. I'd catch them slowing down when they walked by, pausing a second too long to check their phones near our driveway. One afternoon, a couple walked their dog across the lawn, right up to the SUV, pretending to admire the tires. By week's end, I found a flyer tucked under my windshield wiper. Are our streets safe? Is Silver Crest becoming a target? Unregistered vehicles attract crime. Demand action. Protect our homes. It was unsigned, but I didn't need a signature. It had Karen's fingerprints all over it. I brought it inside and set it on the table next to Ethan's coffee mug. He glanced at it, barely reacting. "She's escalating," he said. "She's rallying the neighbors." Ethan gave a single nod, eyes drifting back to his laptop screen. The glow lit up a map of our neighborhood. I caught a glimpse of tiny red markers, some labeled with initials, others blinking slowly. I didn't ask what they meant. Instead, I tried again. "You sure you can't just move the truck? Or park it in the garage at least?" "I can't," he said, calm, final. There was no anger in his voice, just certainty, like the sound of a door locking shut. Most nights he stayed up past midnight. I'd hear soft keystrokes, muted phone calls, or nothing at all. Sometimes I'd catch him staring out the window, not watching something, but waiting. I wanted to press him, to ask outright what the hell was going on, but I'd been in the service long enough to recognize the look in his eyes. It wasn't defiance, it was containment. Whatever he was doing, it wasn't just important, it was delicate. Still, I couldn't ignore the growing pressure outside. Karen sent another certified letter. This time it was phrased like a final warning. She CC'd the HOA board and even the county compliance officer. Failure to act within 72 hours will result in forced vehicle removal at the homeowner's expense. That night, I found Ethan on the porch, watching the street. He didn't say anything, just handed me a manila envelope sealed with my name on it. "In case something happens," he said. I didn't ask what was inside, I just held it, and realized for the first time this wasn't a disagreement about rules, it was a countdown. By the 4th notice and the 3rd fine, I'd had enough. I waited until the glow under Ethan's door dimmed, and the familiar creak of the hallway floor signaled he was still awake. I knocked, twice, and let myself in. He sat cross-legged at his desk, a single lamp casting sharp shadows across the room. The laptop was closed for once. A mug of coffee steamed beside it. He didn't look surprised to see me. "I need to ask," I said. "What's in the truck?" He looked at me for a long time, really looked, then leaned back in the chair and folded his hands over his stomach. "You don't want to know." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I can give you." Silence stretched between us, not cold, just heavy. "They're going to tow it," I said. "Karen's gone full throttle. Notices, fines, threats. I think she lives for this kind of control." Ethan gave a tired smile. "Yeah, I figured that out. I tried warning them, told her this wasn't just some parked car. You know what she said?" He raised an eyebrow. "She called me paranoid, said I was slipping." Ethan didn't flinch. "Let them think that." "What's in it, Ethan?" He looked out the window. His voice was calm. Almost too calm. "That truck isn't just transportation. It's an active federal asset. If they lay a finger on it, if they tow it, touch it, open it, they're interfering with a live surveillance operation." I felt my stomach tighten. "You're serious?" He turned to me, and for the first time since he'd come home, I saw something behind his eyes. Not fear, not bravado. Wait. "Dad, if they move it, they won't be dealing with HOA violations. They'll be dealing with Homeland Security lawyers, and if anyone opens that truck without clearance, they'll trigger more than just alarms." I sat down on the edge of the bed, processing. I'd seen war. I'd briefed generals. But nothing made your heart slow, like realizing your kid is living in a world of danger and silence, and doing it alone. "You shouldn't have come here with this," I said quietly. "I had no choice. I needed eyes here." A beat passed. "And I needed you." It hit harder than any revelation. Not what was in the truck, but that he'd come home, not just to hide, but to trust me after everything. I stood and walked out of the room without another word, because if I'd stayed, I might have said too much. The next morning I went to Karen, tried to explain. She laughed. Not politely, not even uncomfortably. She laughed like I'd just told her the earth was flat. "I knew something was off," she said. "You're slipping, David. That boy of yours is pulling you into his paranoia. I'll give you one more day." I looked her in the eyes. One more day might be more than you'll want. I woke up to the sound of metal clanking against concrete. It was 3:07 a.m., the kind of hour when silence should be absolute, when the only thing you hear is the hum of your own heartbeat. But that night there was movement, deliberate, mechanical, cold. I pulled on my robe and went to the front window. There it was. A tow truck backed into my driveway like a predator stalking prey. Its hazard lights pulsed red and amber across the siding of our house. The truck's engine growled low, like it knew it wasn't supposed to be here. Two men worked fast. Chains hooked, tires braced, lift in motion. They moved like they'd done this before, like someone had told them to be quick and quiet. Karen's fingerprints all over it. But what stopped me cold wasn't the tow truck. It was Ethan, standing barefoot on the front lawn in sweatpants and a t-shirt, arms crossed over his chest. He wasn't yelling, wasn't stopping them. He just stood there, watching. And in his hand, his phone. The camera light flickered once as he raised it, snapped a photo, and lowered it again. I stepped outside. The air was colder than it should have been. "You're just going to let them take it?" I asked, half whisper, half accusation. He didn't take his eyes off the scene. "It's time," he said. The SUV lifted off the ground, steel groaning against rubber. The tail lights blinked one last time. Then the truck drove off, disappearing down our street like a ghost dragging a coffin. Ethan turned back toward the house. "Don't say anything to anyone," he said. "Not until they come." "Who's they?" "You'll know." And then he went back inside. By the time I woke the next morning, he was gone. His room was undisturbed. Bed made with military precision. Laptop gone, no sign of struggle or rush. Just a sealed envelope on the kitchen counter with my name written across the front in his clean, slanted handwriting. I opened it with shaking fingers. Dad, don't answer questions. Wait for contact. Trust me. Ethan. I read it twice, memorized it, then folded it back up and slipped it into my wallet like a war order. Around noon, the neighborhood began to buzz. Not metaphorically, literally. A black SUV I'd never seen before crept slowly down the main road of Silver Crest. No plates, tinted windows, subtle antenna array barely visible against the roofline. It parked not in a driveway, but along the curb directly across from Karen Whitmore's house. A man in a dark gray suit stepped out. Not rushed, not nervous, just precise. He held no badge, carried no folder, only a small leather case, the kind you don't open in public. I watched him scan the house numbers, then nod to himself as if confirming coordinates. I didn't go outside, didn't speak, but I noticed something the HOA never would have expected. He wasn't looking at my house, he was looking at them. Later that afternoon, I saw 2 more SUVs, identical to the first, park silently along the corners of our block. No confrontation, no agents, just presence. That was when it hit me. The silence of the past few weeks, the long nights, the sealed laptop, the SUV that never moved, none of it was hesitation. It was orchestration. Ethan hadn't been waiting because he was afraid. He'd been waiting because the timing had to be perfect. Whatever the HOA had done by towing that vehicle, they hadn't just made a mistake. They'd triggered a chain reaction. And this wasn't going to be a neighborhood spat anymore. This was federal now. It was just after 9 a.m. when the knock came. 3 short raps, no doorbell. Not the kind of knock that asks permission. More like one that tells you this is happening now. I opened the door to find a man in a charcoal gray suit, mid-40s, clean shave, sunglasses that didn't come off even as he extended a badge. Special Agent Lucas Klein, Department of Homeland Security. "May I come in, Mr. Langley?" The words were calm. Not a request, just protocol. I stepped aside and gestured toward the kitchen. He walked like a man who already knew the layout. I poured coffee. He didn't touch it. Klein stood at the table, opened a leather folder and laid it flat. Inside were 2 photographs. One of the SUV as it was towed away, another of Ethan, grainy but unmistakable, taken from what looked like a rooftop vantage. "Your son is fine," he said, reading the question off my face. He initiated Phase 2 this morning. That was part of the plan. "Plan?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Klein nodded once. "Your son, Ethan Langley, has been embedded with DHS counter-financial operations for the last 4 years. He's been investigating a multi-state laundering network that runs money through real estate shell companies, false contracting bids, and inflated development budgets." My hands went still around the coffee mug. "The HOA?" I said. "Your HOA," Klein corrected, "flagged 2 months ago. The pattern matched a known laundering structure. Repeated contractor overcharges, backdoor deals on landscaping contracts, and misappropriated HOA dues. On paper, it looked like community maintenance. In reality, it was siphoning money through ghost firms. And the truck?" He smiled thinly. "That SUV was a surveillance asset. It contained a mobile relay node for encrypted transmissions, satellite uplinks, and long-range audio surveillance. It also served as bait." I blinked. "Bait?" Ethan suspected someone inside the HOA would eventually push too far. By towing the SUV, they triggered federal protocol. Chain of custody is broken. Evidence flags activate. We track who calls who panics, who hides, and we're already seeing movement. My chest tightened, not from fear, but from something heavier. Recognition. Ethan had been playing chess while the rest of us were arguing about lawn decor. "Why didn't he tell me?" I asked, the words brittle. Klein finally sat down. "Because he trusted you would hold the line without needing the details. That's what made you useful." There was no judgment in his voice, just fact. I nodded slowly, letting it all sink in. All the silence, the late nights, the still SUV. It wasn't hiding, it was anchoring. And Ethan, my son, the boy I'd once taught to ride a bike on this very street, had come back not to rest, but to watch over it all. Over me. He wasn't just doing his job, he was protecting his own. You can feel the moment a neighborhood turns on itself. It's not loud, not dramatic, it's quiet, like pressure releasing from a closed valve. The day after Agent Klein left my kitchen, Silvercrest Estates stopped pretending. No more smiles. No more clipped greetings during dog walks. Just front doors closing faster. Eyes behind blinds. A cul-de-sac suddenly aware it had been sitting on a fault line. Karen called for an emergency HOA board meeting that evening. Residents were invited, but it was clear from the email this wasn't about transparency, it was about damage control. I didn't attend, I didn't need to. But I heard enough. The meeting lasted less than 20 minutes. Karen opened with misinformation circulating in the community and ended with a claim that the SUV had posed a security risk and that its removal was an act of neighborhood safety. That would have been a fine little performance if it hadn't been followed by the arrival of 3 separate legal notices the next morning. Certified mail, hand-delivered. Each bearing seals I recognized all too well. Department of Justice, Internal Revenue Service, Department of Homeland Security. The board members began folding like umbrellas in a thunderstorm. First was Tom Reyes, the treasurer. He issued a public statement distancing himself from the actions of the president, claiming he only signed what was handed to him. Then came Andrea Patel, secretary. She resigned via group email, citing inconsistencies in financial documentation that made her deeply uncomfortable. By lunchtime, the HOA chat group had gone silent, except for one post from someone anonymous. It simply read, "Karen's call was recorded." At first, I thought it was speculation, a rumor. But around 3 p.m., another government SUV arrived. Not to my house. This one pulled directly into Karen Whitmore's driveway. A single man got out. Not an agent this time. A federal auditor. A human paper shredder with a badge. He carried a file in one hand. Karen answered the door. She didn't invite him in. They spoke outside, tense, close, short. By nightfall, the twist unraveled itself. The call Karen had made, the night after the tow, was to her brother-in-law, a real estate developer who'd secured multiple landscaping and infrastructure upgrade contracts through the HOA over the past 2 years. She thought she was being smart. She told him they took the truck. If there's anything connected to it, clean it up, now. She didn't know the call was monitored, the number flagged, her voice recorded. In one sentence, she'd not only acknowledged the truck's significance, she'd linked herself directly to someone already on DHS's radar. That one call unraveled months of lies. Karen spent the next day inside, shades drawn, no walks, no clipboard. The HOA Facebook page vanished. The Silvercrest website redirected to a 404 error. I stood on my porch that night, mug in hand, watching her house like it was a crime scene, because, in truth, it was. She'd spent weeks trying to control everything, trying to shrink the world down to fines, forms, and fear. But she picked the wrong fight. And now she was caught in a web she didn't even see coming. The board could lawyer up all they wanted. But the law was already here. I always thought strategy was about reacting faster, striking harder, outmaneuvering chaos. But what Ethan did, that was something else entirely. I got the call at 6:41 a.m., 2 days after the tow. Blocked number, calm voice, 3 words. He planned it. Then they hung up. A few hours later, Agent Klein returned. No briefcase, no documents. Just a single sentence as he stepped inside my front door. "You should know the operation was never compromised." I stared at him, waiting for the explanation I didn't realize I was desperate for. "The truck wasn't the operation," Klein said. "It was the spark." He motioned for me to follow and led me out the front door. We walked down the block just past the HOA clubhouse. He stopped beside a utility box, a standard green, the kind no one ever notices. He tapped the lid twice, like knocking on an old friend's door. Then he turned to me. "Main hub's in here, dual uplink, solar battery backup. The SUV was just a decoy node, meant to be visible, meant to draw attention." He looked almost impressed when he said it. Ethan knew the HOA would fixate on the obvious, knew they'd obsess over what they could see and try to remove it. So he gave them something to chase. I stared at the box, suddenly realizing how much of this neighborhood I'd never really seen. Klein continued. He'd already installed micro-drones to run daily aerial passes, camouflaged as birds. Utility feeds were tapped weeks ago. The whole system was built to survive tampering. He paused. "And Karen?" She played her part beautifully. Her call to her brother-in-law wasn't just a betrayal. It was a trigger. It proved intent, connection, motive. She broke protocol. She implicated herself. All we needed was her to make a move. On record. I shook my head, trying to process the layers. All this time, I thought he was being cautious. Klein gave a faint smile. He wasn't being cautious. He was being surgical. I stood there in silence, watching morning light spill over the neat little lawns of Silver Crest. For years, this place had worshipped order. Clean streets, trimmed hedges, controlled narratives. And in the end, that obsession with control made them predictable. That's what Ethan had counted on. Karen hadn't just triggered a federal response. She'd walked into a precision-laid trap, thinking she was in charge. I looked back toward my house. Quiet, familiar, and now part of a federal sting operation. All because my son saw what none of us wanted to admit. That sometimes the most dangerous people in a community are the ones with clipboards and no oversight. And the best way to catch them? Let them expose themselves. It broke just before noon. Channel 7. News. I was in the kitchen fixing lunch when I heard my name through the walls. "Silver Crest, HOA president arrested this morning in a sweeping federal fraud investigation." I stepped into the living room, heart pacing slower than it should have. On the screen, Karen Whitmore, handcuffed, escorted down the walkway of her home by 2 plainclothes agents. Her cardigan was wrinkled. Her mouth moved, but the audio had been cut, just subtitles. "This is a misunderstanding. Get that camera out of my face." The headline bar read, "Neighborhood Scandal. HOA President accused of obstruction, conspiracy, and financial misuse." They played footage from the emergency board meeting 2 days prior, spliced with drone shots of our community. They even showed a still of the black SUV being towed, labeled Central to Federal Operation. I sat down, plate untouched. It wasn't schadenfreude, not exactly, but there was a strange silence inside me, like justice had arrived without knocking. By the next morning, 3 board members had resigned. Their statements were filled with phrases like, "didn't know the full scope," and "coerced into compliance." One claimed to have been misled by Karen's husband, who, as it turns out, sat on the advisory board of a real estate firm flagged by Homeland. The HOA office was locked up, its windows papered over. A county order had been taped to the glass. Operations suspended pending legal review and federal oversight. In other words, they were done. That weekend, I couldn't walk down the block without someone stopping me. "David, I'm sorry for what we said. We didn't know your son was, well, that. You held your ground. I admire that. Funny how fast people turn from critics to allies when the news tells them who the hero is. And Ethan, still gone, still silent. But now, the neighborhood that once whispered about his truck spoke of him like a myth. And me? I just stood quietly, listening to it all. Because the truth didn't need to be defended anymore. It had already been broadcast to everyone. It was just after sunset when I heard the tires roll onto the driveway. No sirens, no engine roar. Just the soft crunch of gravel and the low purr of a machine that had returned home. I stepped onto the porch, and there he was. Ethan, standing beside, the black SUV like he'd never left. No badge, no gear. Just a gray sweatshirt, jeans, and that same steady look in his eyes. We didn't say anything at first. He sat down beside me, the wood of the old porch creaking under his weight. For a long moment, we just sat there, watching the sky turn from peach to purple, the neighborhood strangely calm after weeks of tension. Finally, I said, "You were protecting more than just the country, weren't you?" He didn't look at me, just nodded once. "You too, Dad." Those 3 words settled deeper than any explanation ever could. The SUV sat in the driveway like it belonged there now. Clean. Still. Unmoved. But this time, untouchable. A small placard had been fixed to the windshield. Government property. Do not tow. It wasn't just a warning, it was a message. The neighbors saw it. I saw them pretending not to look as they passed by. But no one said a word, no flyers, no notices, no Karen. Because Karen wasn't home anymore. She was awaiting trial. And the HOA? They received a federal mandate that very morning, signed and stamped with the full weight of Washington. All unjust fines, fees, and penalties collected over the past 5 years were to be repaid in full. A public apology was required. Any future enforcement actions would be subject to state and federal oversight. They were no longer rulers of the block. They were under review. And me? I didn't need credit. Didn't want it. I just poured 2 mugs of coffee, handed one to Ethan, and leaned back in my chair. The fight was over. And for the first time in a long, long while, the driveway was ours again. If you've ever tangled with an HOA, you know the real battles don't happen in courtrooms. They unfold on driveways, in silence behind drawn blinds. Stick with us for more stories where quiet strength rewrites the rules and the clipboard tyrants finally meet their match. Because sometimes the smallest act of defiance is federal, and justice, it parks right out front.